We are joined this morning by Rabbi Dr. Noam Weissman, but as I was told, I'm just going to go by Noam.
No.
And we have an interesting topic because it's a topic that is popular and provocative and important, not just for us, but for the future of our people and the children in our schools and our synagogues, especially what's happening in the world today. And we're joined by Rabbi Dr. Noam Weissman, Executive Vice President of Open Door Media. Noam, it's great to have you.
Rabbi Sherman, let's just go with Noam moving forward. And so good to be here. So good to speak to you about a topic that's deeply meaningful to me. And I know it's on the minds of parents and adults and educators across the globe. So thanks for having me.
So before we talk about Israel, I want to talk about your T-shirt, a pasuk. I've never seen somebody wear a pasuk from the Book of Esther. So maybe explain which verse you're speaking about on your T-shirt.
Absolutely. Happy to talk about my shirt. Didn't know we were going to go there. Actually, you know what? It has a lot to do with our discussion today. So it happens to be one of my favorite verses. I think I wrote a story in the Jewish Journal, maybe a cover story at some point about this verse and about why this matters a lot to me. But it's a lot of Christians wear shirts that say John this or Luke that. I think that this moment in Esther, when she is asked to do something that goes against her immediate needs and perhaps her immediate gratification, she says, I got this. She says, when Mordechai says to her, who knows if maybe this is why you're in this position, she may or may not have good things happen to her and her family. It's possible this won't work out. It's possible that when I go to visit the king, you know what? It's not going to work out. I'm not going to get what I want, and maybe I might even die. And yet she still is this heroine that she is, this hero that she is. And she says, even if it is the case that I have to sacrifice, even if I lose, even if I don't benefit in the end, I'm still going for it. And to me, she's the queen because of that. And it's Esther 4:14, baby. That's what I'm about. And so that's what I'm hoping to make sure that everyone thinks about. I think it has a lot to do with the conversation at hand today.
Yeah, so the conversation today is about how we educate our children about Israel. Now, growing up, I was a child of the 80s and 90s, and not only was Israel a given, but Israel had a very strong place in Jewish identity. And today, there's a challenge between the connection of diaspora Jewry and children in Israel. So how does, I guess, that verse relate to we're going to try something perhaps different? So maybe talk about how were you educated about Israel as a child, and how do you educate your children today?
Great. So let's go with how I was educated and kind of, I guess, to how I got to what I'm doing right now, which could really tell this broad story. I was educated the way I think many Jewish kids who went to Jewish day school were educated, which is what I would describe as a really beautiful background of Zionism was a given, where I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, where religious Zionism was a given in the school I went to in elementary school, and also where I went to for high school. I went to Modern Orthodox school for elementary school, community school for high school. And the assumption was that religious Zionism and Zionism, the deep connection to Israel, was just part of your identity, right?
I mean,
whatever that is.
Define religious Zionism for people?
I think religious Zionism, as distinct from Zionism, is a Zionism that says that there is a religious value in addition to being a safe haven for the Jewish people. We first need to define Zionism, by the way.
Right.
But the religious Zionism would say that there is a religious value to the creation of a Jewish state. And it is not only not a religious theological problem that such a state exists, that such sovereignty exists, but is actually a good thing. And it is either a good thing because there are Jewish people who are dying for it, and therefore it becomes valuable. That's Rabbi Soloveitchik's perspective. It's saving lives. Or there's a Rav Kook perspective, which is that we're moving towards this messianic moment, this what would be described as messianic Zionism, and we need to build towards that and cultivate that. That's religious Zionism. And the Zionism that we all grew up with was, Israel's the best. Israel's a safe haven for all Jewish people. We cannot have an identity that is anything separate from Israel. And Jaffa oranges are the best. Come on, have you not been to Jaffa? Best oranges ever. If they say something negative about Israel, the newspapers say something negative about Israel, it's your job to defend Israel at all costs. It is when they say occupied, you say disputed. When they say, Israel was born in sin and that there's a moment like Dar Yassin, you say never happened. And I think in many ways we were trained to be Israel defenders.
Mm-hmm.
And I should state that in addition to being Israel defenders, that's the more communal, the more educational framework that we had. And I took to it, by the way, I did. I took to it. Look at my background. Look at what I do. I ran a school in LA, Shalhevet, for many years. Now I help lead a media company running the content for our media company about connection to Israel and Zionism. So for me, 25 years ago, it worked in many ways. And my parents and my family helped me think a little bit differently, which was, I think, and we could talk about this, and I want to, hear to walk and chew gum at the same time, very simply. That's what my parents taught me to do. And then that allowed me to really develop a new approach to Israel education that I think that this generation sorely needs and is requesting.
When do you think that change happened? Was it generational? Was it political? Was it the sort of opening of people's eyes to a different way of learning about the world? And it happened both here in this country and there in Israel. When did that change happen that people realized, like you, we have to change the model of perhaps defending as opposed to being nuanced?
Yeah, I haven't even used the N word yet. I haven't said nuance yet, and because in Israel education, you can't even say nuance. You can't even say Israel education without talking about nuance, and I'll get to that. And so here's what I mean. Here's I think what happened. There's one word and it starts with a G. Google.
Yeah.
I think Google changed everything. Once information became accessible to anyone and everyone, then what emerges from that is that you can't hide stuff anymore. It's much easier in a world in which my information is coming from books and I have to go to a library and search for it, or I'm distant from what's going on there. It's much easier to say, here's the way to think about it. Here's the myths and here are the facts. Once there's Google, and then there's YouTube, and then there's Al Jazeera Plus, and then there's Instagram, and then there's Snapchat, and then there's TikTok. The reality is information is out there. Images are in front of our faces that we can't ignore. We just can't. I have to deal with it in some way. And I think that technological revolution over the last 20 years has had a radical shift in terms of what we are exposed to. And as a result of that exposure, I believe that there ought to be a different method.
That's fascinating because I said generational, you said technological, which go hand in hand, but it's beyond just generations as well. And so let's talk about the different age levels, right? I have a 10, 8, and 6-year-old. It's 5th, 3rd, and 1st grade. In 1st grade, should my child be learning about Israel differently than they are in 5th grade and then when they hit middle school these days? And what are those intricacies that they should begin to understand the differences?
Absolutely. I think they absolutely should be taught differently. So my dissertation is on Israel education and identity development, that I spent a lot of time thinking about these sorts of questions. And what we do at Unpacked and at Unpacked for Educators is make content primarily for middle school and high school and college and above people. But there is a tremendous amount of research that has gone into what we know about how young people think and what makes them motivated. And it starts with Piaget, right? So to those listening and are bored about hearing educational theorists, but the reality is that Piaget started this discussion. And what Piaget started with was a sensory motor stage, that's 0 to 2. Then there are three other stages. There's the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and then there's the formal operational stage. And each of these stages, Piaget argued that people think differently. As you go up, essentially, you think more conceptually. You're able to deal with hypocrisy in a different way. The point of view, the ability increases as you get older. Now, having said that, he had a machloket with another great Rebbe, not just Piaget, but Vygotsky. And Vygotsky said, one second, what happens, you're talking about from within. What happens without? And what happens, what the more knowledgeable other, he called it, can help influence how different people assimilate information and accommodate information.
Who are the without?
Say again?
Who are the without? Who are the within?
The within is like from within the student, him or herself. And the without is the external, from the teacher, from the parent. What can a parent do? What can a teacher do to help someone think differently about an idea? And so what happens what happens, and Sivan Zakai, who has written tremendous research in these areas, she wrote an article in 2015 about this, already in 2015. And she demonstrated that I think kindergarten students were able to, even at the pre-operational stage, even when they are more egocentric, even when they are very concrete, even at that stage, they're able to say, on the one hand, Israel is a Jewish state. On the one hand, it's a state for everyone. On the one hand, Israel is a safe haven. On the other hand, it's dangerous. On the one hand, Israel is special. On the other hand, Israel is like every other nation. And just the ability to think that. And when I think of my own kindergartners, by the way, I don't have a kindergarten right now, but I have a fourth grader, a first grader, a preschooler. There is an ability, if we help navigate that and help construct that, to think this sort of way. And I'll give you an example. Let's go with Shabbat. We observe Shabbat. My daughter Liana, I love her. She's amazing. When she was 4 or 5 years old, and she saw Jewish people not observing Shabbat, she would say, "Oh, they're not Jewish." I'd be like, "No, they're Jewish. They're Jewish. They're Jewish." But her conception, in a very concrete way, was, well, we're Jewish and we observe Shabbat. So what does that mean? That a year later, we had those conversations. Just a year later, she was able to very easily understand that you're Jewish, someone else is Jewish, and we do different things. And that's okay. And that's great. And they're still Jewish. So I use that as an example of what learning can look like with Israel and Zionism. And when I said it should look different, I also mean what it should be scaffolded along the way towards what I call a mature engagement of Zionism in Israel. And we actually have a curriculum on Unpack for Educators that takes people through that. You should teach a method of how to think differently and discrepantly about ideas. You don't have to go with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. You don't have to talk about the occupation or quote the occupation in kindergarten. That's okay. Like we'll get there in sixth grade, in eighth grade, we'll get there. But what you could teach your students, and what I think we need to be teaching our students, is how to think about conflict, about different ways to deal with tension. So you could teach Begin versus Ben-Gurion.
Yeah.
And then after you do Begin versus Ben-Gurion, you could talk about Jewish and democratic and see the tension there. And then after you have that, you could have Arab Israeli. And then after you have that, you have Palestinian Israeli. My one fear, so you hear the method, there's an actual method to this, such that by the time that they get to what I would call the biggest challenge, they have a method for thinking about it. And we have to be inserting that method both parentally, communally, and educationally in the classroom. One more story on this question, Rabbi. I have a friend, a close friend of my son, I should say. And this is, I think, a tragedy is too strong of a word, but this is what I think we should be very careful of. From a family, a great family, really a wonderful family, one of my favorite families. And she was telling me that she's going to be going to Israel. And I said, that's amazing. That's awesome. I love Israel. I've spent years there. I teach about Israel. My whole life is Israel, Zionism. I then said, because I'm ridiculous and provocative, I then said, do you want to meet any Palestinians when you're there? So she looks at me and goes, Palestinians? No. Why would I do that? I'm like, I don't know. There are a lot of Palestinians living around Israel. They're Arab citizens of Israel. Like, she's like, no, they're going to kill me.
Wow.
I said, what? I said, have you ever met a Palestinian? She's like, no, but they're all terrorists. They kill people. And all Palestinians are bad. And at that moment, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. There's something off in your education if, without having met a Palestinian, without knowing anything, like I said to her, like, I've met really wonderful Palestinian people before, and that's good, and you should know about that. But in her psyche already is inbuilt, and it's not from her parents, and I know that it's not from her parents at all. It's inbuilt. It's built in that there's good guys and bad guys, and I think if we here's the word, if we nuance it a little bit, we texture it a little bit, then we can teach our young people to be passionate Zionists, to be vibranta Zionists, to love Israel, and to have empathy for others, and have a desire to learn about and with others.
Yeah, so I love that term, mature engagement of Israel. And so maybe let's talk about birthright for a second, because what we've heard from the younger generation, and I'm 40, so I mean in our 20s right now, is a theme that I've been lied to. And these are people that grew up within the Second Intifada when the state of Israel was literally under attack after disengagement,
Yes.
missiles coming from Gaza, which we hoped would have been a beautiful beach. And so if you're planning a trip right now for somebody who's in 8th grade, which nuances do we show them on the ground so that they understand that it's the mature engagement of Israel that they're going to see to bring home?
Okay. So I actually have been thinking about that question a lot. That sort of question, right? Who do we, when you're going to Israel, 12th graders, 8th graders, 6th graders, with Route 1 between 10th and 11th graders? It's a great question. So Avi Posen, who's a colleague of mine, he and I have discussed this sort of question a lot. And I'll give you some ideas, and it's a little bit different than probably what you were expecting. But when I talk about empathy, I actually mean empathy for Israelis, in addition to Palestinians. I mean empathy for the other. And American Jewry, I think, is very separate. You saw what just happened with the Israeli elections, and Ben Gvir and Smotrich being part of the government. It kind of like the American and Australian and the UK reaction was kind of like, what? What's going on here? Broadly speaking, not everyone, but broadly speaking. And there's a disconnect, I think, between world Jewry and Israeli Jewry about what's motivating the other and what's pushing the other, and really what's bothering the other, I should say. So one of the things I think we should be doing is getting to know Israel.
Yeah.
Sorry?
No, yeah, exactly.
So I think we have to get them to know Israel a bit better. So one of the things that I think we should be doing is having them see the history of places like of periphery development towns, meaning not just Ben Yehuda, not just Caesarea, not just Matzada, not just all those wonderful tourist places, but I think they should go to Dimona. I think they should go to Kiryat Shmona. I think they should go to Afula. I think they should go to Yerucham, that kind of thing, where they understand the building up of Israel. There's some of the challenges of Israel, the periphery of Israel. I think that really matters. I think going to Gush Etzion and seeing, this is another thing that Avi and I spoke about, seeing Gush Etzion and seeing the diversity of what it means to be a settler, by the way. And it doesn't just mean one thing. It means they have diverse opinions there. Some of the leading, by the way, interesting, some of the leading religious Zionist settlers were also proponent of land for peace, for example. That's like a really hard thing to understand. And so having them go to Gush Etzion would be a powerful thing. If you're okay going past the Green Line, which I'm very okay with. Going to, instead of just going to David Ben-Gurion's Sde Boker, which we all did, go to Menachem Begin, and he has a different voice than what I think many of us have learned from. Understand Charedim, and meet with, or go to Bells and see what's the vibrancy of the Hasidic life there. These are things I think we should be doing in addition to Masada and Engedi, which are lovely. The Dead Sea, the salt, the whole thing. You float. It hurts my scratches. I'm there. I'm with you. It's cool. It's interesting. But that's the type of thing those are the types of things I'd want to do. And if they already have had some scaffolding to the point of understanding about the Arab-Israeli and Palestinian-Israeli conflict, then I think that there are probably groups of people or individuals that you could be meeting with, that you could either go to either their Arab cities within Israel, and you could go and see what that's like. There are Arab neighborhoods. There are people there that I could recommend that you could get to know a little bit, that sort of thing. There's someone named, I'll just say his name, Mohammed Dajani Daoudi, who runs a program called Wasatiyah, which is about moderation in Islam and about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. There's just so much you could be doing, but I wouldn't do those things without also having preparation beforehand. A line I used to say when I was running Shalhevet was, I used to take all these students from Poland and to Israel, all the 12th graders. I would say a famous line, a rabbinic line, "En kedusha b'li hachana." There is no holiness without preparation, and I think that one of the keys to a good experiences is you can't do it without that real preparation. So you got to do the preparation beforehand.
So how would you take somebody who is a mature, engaged person now in Israel, bring them back to this country, put them on a college campus after they've had mature engagement, and I don't like using the word combat, but be in conversation with people that are uneducated, who don't know anything about Israel, who then take an anti-Zionistic approach? What does that look like for our students?
So I'm not sure. I'm not one of those people, Rabbi, that thinks that we should be doing that whole game of combating. I think there are people out there that like fighting that good fight, and they get going from that. And I'm a much more of a believer of, maybe this is an approach, is instead of saying Shelo Asani Goy, saying Gishmak, to be a Yid. Meaning instead of focusing on fighting the others, I like celebrating who we are and our identity. And that's generally my approach. If people want to have a conversation, then let's have a conversation. But if people just want to fight, then I see the influencers and the activists on screen, and we feel good, we feel good, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, you did it. You fought them. I don't know if that method, and again, it genuinely feels good when I see it. I don't know if that does anything to move the needle on either convincing other people of their perspective, outside of making them feel stupid, or making them dig their heels in. Very few people change their perspective based on logic, right, or based on facts. They don't. And you could read The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. You could read Adam Grant's works. It's just not the way humans are wired. And the way we are wired, though, is by storytelling, by hearing deeply from another person that you genuinely hear where they're coming from.
Right.
And then you're informed by their perspective, and they have to be open to changing their perspective. But if those ingredients aren't there, then outside of feeling good about what you're doing, I don't know what the good is. What I think is really important is being, there's a line in Pirkei Avot. Sorry, I'm saying a lot of Torah ideas, but I think these are important.
Never be sorry.
Okay, I think our sages had a lot of wisdom. Dama lahashiv la'apikoros, right? Know what to respond to an apikoros, to someone who is a denier of the faith. I think it's the Tiferet Yisrael who said on this idea, it's not that you have to respond to them. That's not the goal, but you have to at least know as much as the person that's fighting against the faith. And what's happening on college campuses, what I find, is that young Jewish students are woefully unprepared not to fight. They're woefully unprepared in their knowledge, in the history, in the issues, and the thickness of identity, the confidence that they have to have in their own Jewish identity. And if they have that thickness and they have the literacy, I'll give you an example, 2 examples. Our YouTube channel, Unpacked, has the history of Israel there. Anyone that wants to know everything about the history of Israel, it's there. There is no longer a reason. There is no longer a reason that anyone should be ignorant about the history of Israel. Ignorance today is a choice. 30 years ago, I don't think it was a choice. People just didn't know a lot. It's a choice. If our young people are graduating our middle schools and our high schools not knowing a certain amount, that's a choice. That is a choice. How they feel, that's less of a choice. But no, that's a choice that we're making. Unpacking Israeli History, the podcast, same thing. That's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. The literacy, it has to be there. So when a college kid goes to campus, I think one of the keys that we want is we want them to have the thickness of identity. We want them to feel deeply part of the Jewish people. And that's from all the schooling that we do. That's what happens at Sinai Temple. That's what you're producing. And then there has to be the literacy, because once there's literacy, there's confidence. And once there's confidence, that's doesn't matter. When I see a person, when I like at USC, let's say when I was in grad school, and I hear people spewing anti-Zionist things, which, you know, feels very deeply anti-Semitic very often, I'm just like, okay, like, cool. It does nothing to my identity, nothing. But that's because of the background that I now have, and there are no shortcuts to that.
So you started in schools in the face-to-face, and you talked about the power of Google, and now you're using the power of Google to educate. So talk about open door media and how you decided to take this path for Israel. I love this word of mature engagement.
So I after I wrote my dissertation, this organization called Jerusalem U reached out to me and asked me to join their team. And I didn't really know much about media. Actually, when I took the job, I didn't have Facebook. I really was kind of probably anti-social media in many ways.
That is,
but I also was, yeah, it's kind of hilarious. My friends make fun of me for this nonstop. It's hilarious. I was that guy that was anti-Facebook. I was there. Now I'm anti-Facebook because no one's there. What the vision was this: in a world in which, and why I think it's so important, in a world in which there's so much misinformation and disinformation, in a world in which people are putting their opinions all over the place and they don't have to be verified, they don't have to be checked, they're just out there and they're shaping the way we think. TikTok shapes the way we think. 51% of Gen Z gets their news on TikTok. Right. 26% of millennials get their news on TikTok. Okay. That means that we have to be there, whether we like it or not. On YouTube, there are already big YouTube channels, whether it's Wendover, Origin of Everything, Vice, Vice News, Crash Course, everything. What we've said at Open Door Media and through our assets like Unpacked is that we have to be doing that for Jewish history, for Zionism, for Israel, for the story of the Jewish people, so that when people are searching what is Hamas, the first video that we want them to find is from us, not from Al Jazeera. The first video we want them to find when they're searching for Hezbollah or Iran or the story of, you know, terrorism that has to do, there's conflicts in the north, whatever it is, we want them to search what is Hezbollah and find our content. By the way, we also want that to be the case with really difficult concepts like and content like Der Yassin, which April 9th, 1948, which was a tragedy that occurred as Israel was building a state. What happened? Well, check out our video on it in Der Yassin. Same with Sabra and Shatila. So when I was taught Sabra and Shatila, and I went to a great high school, and if they're listening, it's a great high school. It really is. It's amazing. But one of the things when we learned about Sabra and Shatila, and check it out on YouTube or on our podcast, Unpacking Israeli History, is we were taught that, like, don't ask questions about, like, Israel was in the right, Israel did everything right, all good. You regardless of whether or not that's true, that approach doesn't work anymore. You can't teach something about the historical moment and not share interpretations and perspectives that they're going to find the second they Google it. And so that's been the methodology, that's been our approach. And now we're on, on Spotify, we're all over the place, Unpacking Israeli History, YouTube, Unpacked, TikTok, Jewish Unpacked. And if they want to hear about Kanye or Kyrie or, Dave Chappelle saying the Jews run Hollywood, we have content on all of that. And it helps people be informed in a world where people want right away, got to have the information right away. We say, okay, we're going to be there and we're going to elevate the conversation.
You have a couple of examples of people that have reached out to you after listening to the content. Not people like me who are involved with this, but maybe somebody who came across that, learned something that maybe they were not looking for, and reached out and said thank you.
Didn't see that coming. So I thank God we have a lot of, the coolest thing about the internet is that you go on YouTube and like funders always want to know what's the impact. I'm like, just go to YouTube, go to comments, just check out the comments section. And there are people, we don't have any idea who they are, for 22 million views of our content, just saying like, oh my gosh, thank you. Oh my, like I finally have connection to Israel. I finally understand the story of Israel. I felt like I was lied to, but now there's something credible, et cetera, et cetera. But there are two names that come to mind right now that I want to share and shout out to these two people. One is Max Makovsky, whose family I think used to live in LA, but now is in Denver, and Gemma Schneider. And these are two college students. Gemma is a student at Harvard. Max is a student at Muhlenberg. And each of them separately reached out and told me different stories. And I'll tell you them very quickly. Gemma is a writer for Harvard Crimson. Okay, it's really cool. A writer for Harvard Crimson. And the Harvard Crimson editorial board wrote this whole review about why they support BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Gemma comes from a very liberal background, didn't go to Jewish day school, but like, and she's liberal and progressive, but like, she just like, I like Israel. Like, what? Huh? This is weird that people are saying just hateful things that I'm friends with, that I'm close to. So she went on Spotify and I think typed in Zionism as racism. And she found our Unpacking Israeli History podcast on UN Resolution 3379. And that started her down a path of rabbit hole of our content on YouTube and JewishUnpack.com, our publishing site. And she then wrote a hugely intense rebuttal to the Harvard Crimson that was thoughtful and nuanced and sophisticated and wasn't hateful. And it was informed by our content. And that to me was like, oh my gosh, what a moment. Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I'm doing something, feel like we're doing something holy when that happens. And then, so
that's amazing, by the way, because I read that. In fact, I've used her story so many times. And when you ask yourself, you're reading something of her and how she had the ability not to combat, as you said, but to simply explain the situation, to know that that's where that foundation comes. I would say gives me pride talking to you right now.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. And when we could do that approach together, Rabbi, I think like what Sinai Temple is doing and what the school's doing, and that's what we have to be accomplishing. That's like if we're trying to think of like the VOG, the vision of graduate, that's what we're trying to get to. Everyone has to be different and everyone looks different and whatever, all those things. Yes. And that's what there is an end product. The end product is someone who is thoughtful, is nuanced, and still passionate and still loving. And you could still go to the rallies, all of those things. Being moderate doesn't mean not caring. It means being like seeing things in totality. And I think that that's okay. The second story, just one more story, because if I can, Max Makovsky, he's a student at Muhlenberg, and he told me is crazy. He reached out and he told me this unbelievable story where there were these protesters at Muhlenberg talking about, Israel's an apartheid state, you're Zionists, colonialists, imperialists, settlers, all these things. And then he didn't do anything. Then he saw, and I won't say organization name, but he said these other people these Jewish kids started fighting them with like that myths and facts approach, right? Uh-huh. And he saw their reaction was just getting angrier and angrier. And he was like something's off. I need to just separate myself from this. And I think that's what happens very often, actually, which we haven't spoken about. But I think a lot of people separate themselves. They want to avoid. They don't want to be part. I want to go. Like I want to kick it. I want to have a good time. I don't want to deal with this narishkeit. I want to deal with this nonsense. So I'm just going to separate myself from it. But he did something different. He went on YouTube and he started typing in objective Israel content, objective Israel history. He found our content, which is not objective, by the way. And I tell people it's not objective. It's not objective. No content is objective. What it is this is a Hanan Alexander framing. It's objective with a point of view, meaning our point of view is Zionism is a good thing. The Jewish people having a Jewish state is a good thing. The Jewish people achieving this is an achievement in Western civilization that is quite sui generis. And game on now for diversity of perspectives and let's understand the history. But it comes from that perspective. So he found our content, started binging it, and then he went back to that whole crew. He tells the story, and he said with his approach, it just softened everyone. And everyone's like, oh, okay, like you hear me, I hear you. The history is more complex than the way I viewed it. And it's almost like this kumbaya ending that like everyone's like, oh, it's so nice and lovely, and we can actually talk to each other. That's the goal. That's the goal.
And so, if Herzl, Golda Meir, Ben Gurion was sitting in this chapel today speaking with you, would they be shocked, surprised, encouraged, depressed? What would they be thinking about this conversation?
So the great thing about Zionism is it's iterative and generative. But it does have one thing that it's always, I think, regardless of your definition of Zionism, Zionism is a rebellion of the Jewish people against a passive past. That's Zionism. And it's meant a lot of different things, but it's always been that. It's always been a people, by the way, connected to Esther 4:14. It's always been about a people that says, I'm going to take action. I'm going to be an activist. I'm going to get stuff done. I'm not going to sit down and watch. I'm not going to be idle. That's not going to be who I am. A Zionist is a mentality. And I think with that mentality of getting stuff done, that they would look at, regardless of it's Herzl or it's Bialik or it's Ahad Ha'am or it's Berdichevsky or it's Golda Meir or it's Aleph Dalet Gordon or it's Henrietta Zold, any of these names, that's what they'd be proud to see that. Now, funnily, I don't think Herzl would understand the Hebrew that's going on in your classrooms because he actually wanted the official language of the future Jewish state to be a German, because that's his initial thoughts were. And then there were people who argued for Yiddish, but at the end of the day, it's the Hebrew language. So when Ben Yehuda really spearheaded that, I think he'd be quite proud of the Hebrew language being spoken in the classrooms. I think Ahad Ha'am would be quite proud to see if this is happening, and I think it is, of the Jewish culture, the food, the music that's imbued throughout the classrooms and throughout the hallways. All of those sorts of things. I think Berdichevsky, I think he would probably find it to be a problem that there are Jews still living in Galut, and that there are Jews that are still Orthodox and conservative, and he would have a problem with that. But he believed that אנחנו הדור האחרון של היהודים, הדור הראשון של העברים, we're the last generation of Jews, and we need to be the first generation of Hebrews, and we need to be working the land in Israel. So I think he might be frustrated about what he's seeing, that there's still a flourishing diaspora. And I think Gordon would tell you, when you go to Israel, you got to plant, you got to build, you got to be part of HaShomer HaChadash, the new guard, and build, and So I think all of those sorts of things. And the greatest thing about all these great Zionist thinkers is that there's so many different flavors. And our young people, and what we should be doing as educators, I think, is knowing our students well enough to figure out which of these to cultivate, which of these to spark. If our kid is politically inclined, okay, follow the Herzl approach. A student is like with their hands and they're like doing stuff, take a Gordonian approach, right? If they're very into music and food and then imbued your whole school with a Ahad Ha'am approach. And there's so many different ways to be a Zionist, and we have to create a wide tent of Zionism, and it doesn't have to be defined by the political.
Yeah, I really love that. Actually, a teacher in our school just did a book tasting in the secular studies, and they took a taste of this genre and that genre, and I think a Zionism tasting would be a beautiful thing within schools and finding your passion that way. Two last questions. One, you mentioned Hebrew. I want to know your thoughts on the power of Hebrew, where a lot of American Jews obviously...
I actually couldn't hear you there, Rabbi. Can you say it again? The power of what?
The power of Hebrew.
Oh, no, it keeps on cutting out.
No, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
The power of Hebrew and the power of language.
I only heard the power of language.
Oh, Hebrew.
Hebrew. Yes. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Is that an obstacle for Jews outside of Israel, or can it be an entry into Zionism?
I think it's both. I think that the Hebrew language is, I'm always thinking about what it means to have a healthy Jewish identity. That's really what if you ask me like what animates me, what keeps me up at night and wakes me up in the morning, that sort of thing. It's cultivating Jewish identity. And having a healthy Jewish identity is really tough, but I think it's so worth it, so worth developing. So a healthy Jewish identity has to include the Hebrew language. There's just so much about culture that it's hard to understand. There's so much about other Jews that it's really difficult to understand. By the way, I think Israeli Jews should probably understand English pretty well because it's the predominant language outside of Israel. And if our goal is arevut, if our goal is belonging, and if our goal is everyone being in it together and peoplehood, then not having Hebrew language at your fingertips. There's a student I work with who loves learning about Israeli history. He loves Jewish history, but he always says to me, he's a 16-year-old kid, he's an amazing kid. He always says to me, I don't know any Hebrew, and I just, anytime you're saying a Hebrew word, could you write it out for me that I could copy it? And seeing his enthusiasm tells me that without that Hebrew language, it's not complete. It's not full. It's just I'm lacking. I'm more of a spectator. I'm more, getting something secondhand. It's more of it's less of an ownership and more of a fan. And I think that's hard. I think it's hard. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't 100 other things. You're not like you're not, to be ignored, and your identity can still be amazing in so many ways and enriched in so many ways. But Hebrew language has to be a part of that. It's access to the Bible. It's access to Jewish law and lore. It's access to Hebrew culture. It's access to amazing Israeli music now. One of the things that I do with my kids every day, I drive them to carpool, except for Friday, when I have a Friday mix, which is, there's a song by Mustafa, like it's Friday, then it's Saturday, Sunday. So we got to do that. But Monday through Thursday, it's all Israeli music. And I know I'm not like amazing at this. I'm not the best at this stuff, but I try. I pause when they're saying whatever they're saying in the chorus, and I sing it with my kids, and they're starting to learn Hebrew words and phrases and idioms as a result of that, which is just fun.
So
and it's indoctrinating, which I love.
Yeah. Last question. We talked about children. We talked about college students. We talked about high school students. I want to talk about rabbis, because rabbi to rabbi for a moment, where there's I don't want to say perception, but even a reality in terms of people going into the rabbinate who are going to be Jewish leaders, who are, I would say, sometimes do not have that mature engagement of Israel. How do you see the future of rabbis preaching from pulpits and in classrooms, in our own day school classrooms, in our own religious school classrooms? What should their education look like for Israel in order to create the next round of mature, engaged kids on Israel?
The worst thing a teacher could be is unprepared and overconfident. That's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, when people are overconfident and undercompetent. And just think about that concept, the Dunning-Kruger effect. And many of us suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. The problem is, it's kind of like Fight Club, and you kind of like, you don't know it unless you're part of it. When you're part of it, you don't even know you're part of it. That sort of, I don't know if the analogy worked there to Fight Club, but you don't know it. You have no awareness that you're part of it. I think we have to do something about that, because I think many educators and rabbis, perhaps their training includes counseling, perhaps their training includes like mind Yoredeya, learning, a Shach and a Taz and these great, rabbinic commentators on Rav Moshe Isserles and Rabbi Yosef Karo. Great. But the reality is that stuff is significantly less relevant than Israel and Zionism and Jewish identity today. That stuff's great. It's wonderful. Learning the laws of kosher are wonderful. But day in, day out, that's not what's on the minds of our young people. And that's not what's in the news. And it's not what's animating every single thing that's happening. And if that's the case, and rabbis are going to be looked to for wisdom, for guidance, for for care, then part of the curriculum, I don't see another way around this. And we're actually doing work. I won't say the name because we're doing work with a very well-known rabbinic uh, ordination program that we're providing training for Israel education for their rabbis. And it's amazing. They're forward thinking. They reached out to us and they said, you guys have this nuanced approach. You have these perspectives that are helpful. You have the literacy. You have all these tools. And they came to us, and we are now running professional development for them. You don't have to get professional development from us. It's all good. But you can't, I don't know how you could become a rabbinic teacher and leader and not have the history of Israel. You don't have to know every moment. You don't have to know when Kfar Qasim happened. You don't have to know about Kibbutz necessarily, but you have to know enough to engage your students in how to think about things as opposed to what to think, and methodologies to do that. And I don't see another way around it. And then every organization, institution, synagogue, school needs to determine what their red lines are, what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. And those are important conversations, but I don't like to dictate that. Every school is going to look different. But I do think that having the literacy needs to be there, the training needs to be there, teaching teachers how to talk about politics without being political, and how to talk about politics without making students feel like they have to agree with you, wink, wink, even if they don't. That is a really important skill set that's necessary for this generation of educators.
Well, we at Sinai Temple are proud to partner with Open Door Media. If you haven't checked them out yet, make sure you check them out on YouTube or the famous Google. The podcast Unpacked by Rabbi Dr. Noam Weissman. And as you said, actually, Israel education being part of rabbis is important. And we at Sinai Temple are proud to launch in January the Sinai Temple Israel Center Rabbinical School Fellowship. We're going to be partnering with people like you, organizations like you, and I'm going to not steal your term, but B'Shem Amro, use it in your name from now on. A mature engagement on the history and really the vibrancy of Zionism of the past, present, and most importantly of the future. Rabbi Dr. Noam Weissman, Open Door Media, so great to have you here. And when you're out in LA, hopefully soon, we'll see you in person as well.
Rabbi Sherman, I want to thank you, and I should say, I want to say this for everyone. You have always been a forward-thinking leader in terms of how to teach about Israel, making sure that it is so important, making sure that it's core to the curriculum, making sure that Zionism it really, really matters, and it's known nationally. It's experienced really across the country, and so I want to thank you as someone who cares deeply about Israel, the Jewish people, and the Jewish state, and doing it in a healthy, sophisticated, meaningful way. You leading a congregation and mattering this much to you gives me a lot of hope for the Jewish future. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll give you a virtual fist bump. Yes. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.